Hey guys, I'm making a card today and I decided that instead of me filming and voicing over like I typically do, I'm going to try something different for me anyway, which is filming live or filming as I go as opposed to me editing and voicing over the directions later. But anyways, for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and get started because this video is probably going to be longer than what I anticipate anyway. So for my card today, I'm going to be using this stamp set from Stampin' Up! Called Pop of Paradise, and this is a stamp set that is from the new 2016-2017 catalog, and this is actually part of a larger suite of products, and most of the stuff in the suite is black, white, pink, and gold, so that's the colors I'm going to use to make my card. And I've already cut out a card base and a front panel, and I'm just going to be working on the front panel right now, and I'm going to be doing quite a bit of stamping and embossing. So I'm going to put down a piece of copy paper to protect my work surface. My cutting mat is definitely on its way out, but I need to do what I can to save it until the new one gets here. And I'm going to be using from the stamp set the 2 leaves and the stamp that says thinking of you and a heart. So I'm going to go ahead and pull those out and set them aside. Now to start with, I'm going to stamp a bunch of these leaves around the sides of the card, and I'm going to leave the middle open. So I'm going to go ahead and mount these on 2 acrylic blocks. And for the black, I'm going to be using VersaFine ink, but my VersaFine ink is actually starting to dry out a little bit. So I'm going to stamp in Versamark watermark ink first before I stamp it in the black. And that's just because I know this is drying out and I want it to stamp a little more smoothly. Try to get the last bit of ink out of this. So I'm going to go ahead and stamp in here and then pick up my black. And I'm just going to go around the edges, and I see that I've over stamped. So I'm going to go ahead and just wipe that away with a towel. So maybe this is not as dry as I thought it was. Okay, so I've cleaned that up. So I'm going to go ahead and just stamp around the edges of the card. And it doesn't have to be perfect. I know some people are really into like getting a really clean and complete image. That doesn't really bother me. Not for this particular card. And now I'm going to repeat the same process with this larger leaf. So I'm going to go in, get some Versamark ink, and then get some black ink on the stamp. I'm done with my black, so I'm going to go ahead and close this up and clean my stamps off, because next I'm going to do some embossing in gold. I have my 2 stamps cleaned off, and I just used my Stampin' Scrub to clean that black ink off. And I'm going to go back in and I'm going to stamp with some Versamark ink so I can do some gold embossing. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and hit this with my heat tool, because I have the distinct feeling that this is not dry, because I used VersaFine and Versamark ink, and my embossing powder is going to stick everywhere if I don't go ahead and set this ink. I'm confident at this point that my ink is dry, and even if it's not, I can brush it off with a paintbrush if the embossing powder sticks. So I'm going to take my embossing buddy and just go over this whole card front before I stamp the rest of my leaves. I have my gold embossing powder stored in one of these little sandwich containers. So I'm going to go ahead and sprinkle this over the design. And it doesn't look like I did a bad job stamping, so I'm not going to have a bunch of embossing powder stuck in too many places where I don't want it. But I do see where it is sticking to the black. at least just in these little spots here. So what I'm going to do to clean that up is take a paintbrush and just knock it off before I set it with my heat tool. And this extra embossing powder I'm just going to dump in the trash can. Now I can finally set this with my heat tool, and then I'll be ready to move on to the rest of the card. My card base, or my card front I should say, is a little bit warped, but that's okay because I'm going to be using dimensional adhesive to adhere it to the front of the card. But before I move on to wrapping my twine and finishing this part, I'm going to go ahead and stamp my sentiment, which is a heart shape that says thinking of you. And I'm just going to stamp it on some black cardstock. And I'm going to heat emboss it as well in gold and then cut it out using my Big Shot. Now, in the new Stampin' Up! Catalog, there's actually quite a few stamp sets that coordinate with the basic shapes, or I guess you could call them basic shapes. Back in the day, Stampin' Up! Had a bunch of punches that were known as like whale tail punches, like the old EK Success punches. And those are now gone, they're retired, and replacing them are large bundles of dies. And this particular heart that I'm going to use to die cut this stamp out is from the Sweet and Sassy collection of dies, and it's just a large bundle of hearts. So I'm going to go ahead and open this embossing powder back up and coat this, and then I'm going to also heat set it with my heat tool. I've pulled out my Big Shot so that I can go ahead and die cut the sentiment that I just stamped. And a while back, someone asked me about this particular machine because it's not common for you to see a blue Big Shot. Now, this one is one of the older models that's actually a Big Kick. It's not a Big Shot, it's a Big Kick, but they all are the same machine. So if you see one that looks like this, that's red or black or white, they all do the same thing. Even the one with like the little pink bow on the top. It's just, it depends on when and where you bought it. So even though you see me using the blue one, you can use the white one, you can use the black one, they all do the same thing. And I know that actually caused a little bit of confusion for some people because there was a, like one made for jewelry making at one point that was brown. It was called Vintage, that people didn't realize that you could also use for paper crafting. But anyways, I'm going to go ahead and tape down this die because I'm not using a magnetic platform. I actually have the thin die adapter on here, the new platform, and it's really just because I don't feel like swapping them out all the time. So I'm going to run that through and go ahead and pop this out of the die. Now that I have my sentiment cut out and I've finished my front panel, I'm going to go ahead and start assembling my card. Now the pop of pink that I'm going to use is Mellow Mambo Baker's Twine, and this is the really thick Baker's Twine. So I'm going to go ahead and just tape the start of this down to the back of my card, just because I think it's going to be easier to wrap if it's taped down as opposed to me trying to hold it with my finger. And I'm going to go ahead and wrap this probably 10 or 15 times because I want a decent band of color. I have a pretty thick band of pink, or Melon Mambo, I should say, Baker's Twine on my card. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this and tape the tail down. Now you can see I'm actually starting to get to the end of the roll of my Melon Mambo Baker's Twine, but there is actually quite a bit of Baker's Twine on this roll. I've just used a lot of it over the last couple of weeks for various projects, including a baby shower. So I've gotten a lot of life out of this particular roll of thick Baker's Twine. And if you were wondering, it comes with 15 yards on here. So there is quite a bit, even though I'm starting to get to the end of my particular roll. Now my idea is that I'm going to go ahead and tie a bow down here at the bottom, but before I do that, I'm going to decide which direction I want to be up first of all, and I'm going to fix the spacing. So I think I'm going to do this side up, and I'm going to go ahead and attach this heart down to the front of the card. But before I do it, I'm going to actually go ahead and tie the bow, because I think it's going to be easier to attach this down if this is already bunched together. And you can see that my base is continuing to warp, but that's okay because I'm going to use strips of dimensional adhesive to attach it down. So I'm going to go ahead and tie this in a bow down here at the bottom. My bow is nowhere near perfect, but I will worry about that once I have this attached down to the front of the card. And for the sentiment, I'm just going to go ahead and glue it down right there. But I can already tell that I'm going to have to use 2 different adhesives. So I'm going to put a little bit of dimensional adhesive in these 2 corners right here. And then I'm going to use a little bit of liquid adhesive underneath the strings, just so that I know it won't slide around or pop loose, which is actually more of a concern than sliding. So 1 dimensional adhesive might be enough. No, it needs 2. So I'm going to layer 2 stacks of adhesive on top of each other, just because the string on this is actually pretty thick. And now that that's doubled up, I can just stick this straight down. And I'll use a little bit of liquid adhesive when I get done with the card, just to adhere this underneath to really keep it from moving. In order to attach this to the front of the card, I'm going to use some dimensional adhesive, just because this is not going to adhere down flat. So I have my jumbo roll of adhesive here, and I'm just going to trim 2 pieces that fit the length of the card on the back. And just to give it a little bit of extra reinforcement, I'm going to go ahead and stick another strip of dimensional adhesive, and these are just some scraps, on the back here, so that this really stays down on the card and doesn't continue to warp. So now I can peel all these backer sheets off and go ahead and secure this to the front of my card base. Now that this is securely on the card, I'm going to go ahead and fix my bow. And unfortunately, I have a habit of tying a bow 9 million times before I can accept the way it looks, even though I'm just going to stick it in an envelope and it's probably going to get messed up to some extent. So once I'm happy with the way that looks, and I would say that's good enough, I'm going to go ahead and trim these tails down because they're a little bit too long. And I'm going to use a little bit of liquid adhesive, and I have a fine tip glue pen to adhere down this bow so it doesn't continue to move around, and the tip of this Thinking of You so it doesn't stick up, because this card is actually pretty thick. This liquid glue does take a little bit of time to dry, so I'm going to go ahead and weigh this down with an acrylic block until I'm positive that it's completely dry. And then I will show you in a final photo what the completed project looks like. So here's a quick peek at the final card. A link to the products that I use will be in the description box down below. And as always, guys, thanks for watching.